Good afternoon. The time is 3:03 p.m. This is a special meeting workshop of the Argyle AISD Board of Trustees. It's December 6, 2023. At this time, we'll determine if a quorum is present.
Leon McDade present.
Josh Western present. Richie Deffinball present.
Leanne Arthur present.
Matt Slayton present.
Craig Hawksworth present.
And Sam Slayton present. We do have a quorum established. At this time, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
This time, we'll have a brief moment of silence. Thank you. This time we will move to our workshop format. No one has signed up for public forum, so we'll go ahead and get started.
Good afternoon. Thank you for everyone for being here. We are going to have a workshop today of the Board of Trustees with the administration, give you a chance to review information that our Bond and Growth Planning Committee that has been working very, very hard all semester. Some information they received last week, and then you also have in front of you some information that they will receive at their meeting next week. We have here with us today Marty Sims with BLK Architect. So Marty's here really to kind of help work with me as far as leading us through this presentation. We also have at the table Dr. Jordan, Ms. Stewart, Jeff Cohen, and then back here we have Dr. Lizzie Johnson, and she is our consultant that's working with us as bond planning. So if we need to bring her in at any point and visit with anything in the process, if it comes up, we can. And then Hudson Huff, our demographer, is also here. So thank you all for being here. In case any questions come up from those areas, we can certainly engage them in this conversation. So without further ado, you should have in front of you the packet, which is the presentation from last Tuesday evening's Bond and Growth Planning Committee. And so where we were at that point with that meeting is the committee had already seen the demographer report at meeting 2. They saw the original facilities assessment and capacity assessments that Mr. Sims' team had done and our operations team had done. They saw that on meeting 2. Meeting 3, we did the tour, and then last week was meeting 4. And so this was the one where they actually started seeing dollar amounts with projects. We also did a review with them on the 10-year strategic growth plan, which we had done with the board on November 13th, kind of looking at timelines and projects based on the enrollment of the demographer report. So this is a chance for us as a team and with the board and administration to talk through questions, talk through projects, different things like that, and ask and let Mr. Sims answer any questions regarding pricing, escalation, inflation. I know there's probably a lot out there we want to talk through, so we'll just kind of go from there. So the first half of the presentation is just the update that we did. So I'm not going to spend any time going through that with you. Are there any questions or things we want to talk through on any of those slides before we move into the actual assessment, the one that with the actual numbers attached? We want to go through that anymore?
The only thing I appreciate you putting all this together and giving us the chance. You know, you look backwards and really bad decisions primarily get made because the data has not been vetted, the data has not been understood, but the data, when it's given to a committee, is assumed as fact. Mm-hmm. And it's happened over the past, and it's happening right now where we as a board have never even been exposed to the data until almost too late.
Sure.
And so this is why I think it's important to do this. We can ask the questions, we can vet the data, but then secondarily, so we can, so at least the committee knows kind of our thoughts behind that. And also, I'm going to ask, we have a self-described timeline that may not be necessary. So i.e., in this case, if they've been given data that we think is not completely accurate or not challenged, then we should have another meeting and give them the new data. I mean, I just don't think we should be confined to, no, we're gonna have this meeting on this date and this date and this date. This is important. You know, this is the bond for our future. So anyway, that all being said, where I would like to start off with just, for our understanding, we have never talked about specifically as a board in regards to the capacity analysis. You know, that's refreshing data that we receive, but the strategy as defined last year was based off of inaccurate numbers,
Okay.
if you will. Because our assumptions were 1750 at Canyon Falls, and we were always assuming to build, and if I'm speaking out of turn, guys, just jump in, but we were always assuming 500 for phase 3, right? Because that's always what's been our assumption, so that would get us to 2250. We realized that we need to get to 4,000 for the future development, so therefore, we asked what could we do at 377, and could we build that up 600 more to get to 1750, 2250. That's where those numbers came from, right? I mean, we didn't say this is the perfect high school allocation. It was built on construction availability. So now we have these new numbers, which actually is very refreshing because we don't have to build as many new seats.
Sure.
But so if we can just get clear understanding of what is the capacity that we feel is available to us at Canyon Falls now, and then what is it at 377, and then I know you're going to go through cost, on either way to get that capacity. To our goal is a total of 4,000 students, right? So that gives us some leeway for the max years. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So.
Okay, very good. So so let me start a little bit about, so when the facilities, they were doing capacity assessments, Mr. Sims came back to us and said, okay, really, we have about 2,100, 2,200 in there. And we said, okay, well, we were operating off of 1,750. So let's sit down, let's talk about where that came from. So Jeff got involved, we counted classrooms, he had walked classrooms, walked the facility, counted again, recognized, yes, that was matching up. In the original capacity assessment, you also, because you had, what was not being counted, where we were getting 1,750 is not counting the electives classes. So you were counting core classrooms, but when actually your students are not just in core classes all day.
Ton of them elsewhere.
Right, there are other places. And so depending on the programming of each campus, each high school, some high schools may say, oh, we have classes in our gym every period, every day. Some don't, those kinds of things. So we scaled back just a smidgen on that. For example, the weight with the mat room.
Yep.
So the mat room where wrestling is. Instead of saying we can count that 6 times during the day, we would count it twice during the day. So we try to use it based on the programming. So that's how we got specifically to 2109. And so that's where that came from. And then, so that led us to, let's check 377 because we've been operating basically on 1150, 1100, 1150. We did the same exercise there. And that's where we came to the 1300. So that's how we landed on both of those capacities at this point. Now, the thing we found is, as people, especially as our campus administrators heard this conversation, is, but our hallways are tight, or our cafeteria is not big enough. Yes, you're correct. Some of your commons areas are not. So for example, over here, they are all going one way. There's, they're going through the same hallway to get back and forth to those wings. And so that connector piece, that build out, that phase 3 would alleviate that. And so we know that some of the common spaces couldn't necessarily hold all of that, but our classroom spaces can at this time. We have, 13 vacant classrooms right now over here? I think there were 13 on the list that were showing vacant classrooms and adding on to and then looking at those electives classes, and those commons areas, because you have a lot of kids in athletics and band during the day that aren't in some of these classes. And he also did it on a 6 out of 7.
Yes.
Okay, on a 6 out of 7 day, so which is a traditional class period schedule. So instead of, you don't want to do 7 out of 7 because kids, most teachers have a classroom to themselves during their conference period. There are high schools that don't do that. They may be built where they have like a den, if you will, where a teacher goes to the den to do planning and their classroom is used for class for someone else. And so then you can look at 7 out of 7. That's not how we currently operate. We operate out of 6 out of 7, where a teacher has his or her room and they would be housed in there during a conference.
So if we, you believe those numbers
Mm-hmm.
and you've vetted those, and so that basically adds up to a little bit over 3,400. Hudson, do we still think that our max is going to be under 4,000 for high school?
For high schools?
Yeah, I mean, that might be now 36 or so, but
Yes, sir. I believe that.
I know originally it was the max is going to be like 39.
Max, I think max is at 38, so I think we referenced a range of about 3,450 to 3,800.
Okay, so 4,000 is not even necessarily the
peak.
high
It's the
end.
high end.
Okay, well, that gives us, so if we use 4,000, then we got to find 600, but we could probably get away with 500 extra seats, right?
That's
Among
fine.
the high schools.
And it's still it's a question of when, not if. I just want to keep
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
Correct.
yes.
and I think we're all in agreement, if we're going to build,
it's faster, it's
Right.
gonna
build it to
alter.
max.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. That's helpful.
Okay. All right, so then the second part of that presentation really is Dr. Johnson's slides that she goes through with the committee, just kind of reminding them of the norms, reminding them that there's going to be some groan zones and those kinds of things, how we work through consensus. And then you're going to come to a slide that's labeled BLK Architect. And this is where we started that section of yes, that one right there. So I'll let Marty kind of go from this point on, because these are his slides, and he'll kind of talk you through that facility process, let him talk through that, and then we'll get to the numbers, and we can work through that together.
All right, my apologies to those that have heard this before. Okay, so, and I'm gonna go through this a little quick. If you guys want me to drill down deeper into anything, just say so, okay? But this first slide, I've kind of moved past the welcome, we're here. This just says, our goals are, number one, safety. So any issues that we find that are unsafe have to be addressed. Our secondary goal is to address capacity, and with your growing district, how are we gonna handle seats when they need, and provide seats when you need them? And then the other piece is what are we looking in for areas that are needing to be upgraded, not just because it'd be nice to upgrade, but because as you're looking at providing similar kind of programs across various places where you're offering them. So if in the future you were gonna have 2 high schools, what does that mean for the 2 high schools? Where is it okay for them to be different, or where do we need to be looking at providing similar kind of equitable conditions? Or if you have a 30-year-old elementary versus a 1-year-old elementary, what does that look like, and is that something that needs to be addressed? So the next page, we just talk about, that's a lot of words on there, but it's really just saying there's a lot of things that go into these buildings designs that neither we nor the administrators or anybody else has control over, that are code related, that are related to the geotechnical conditions or the geology of the site, how deep the piers are, what the foundation system is. Those type things are a lot of what drives cost. The things that we have control over are square footage, so size, and then what we put in by way of amenities. And so these things are generally non-negotiable, right? We got to comply with code, we got to comply with ASHRAE, we got to comply with the Energy Conservation Code, but what we have control over is square footage and those type of things. From an estimate standpoint, this is not one of your buildings. This is an example estimate. This just says the way we do estimates. I think we've talked about this, but I take $1 per foot that's based on conversations I've had with contractors. It's based on estimates that I've received from contractors on similar buildings that we have under design right now or that have bid recently. And when I'm doing that, I want to pull from, if I've got a bid yesterday, that's my best number, right? Of something that's similar, but I haven't always bid an elementary school yesterday or a middle school yesterday. So I'm going to reach out to the most accurate information I can get my hands on, and I talk to as many people as I can talk to try and get to a consensus on what those numbers are. That gets me $1 per foot. The $1 per foot then I take and I will apply so it's a square footage, $1 per foot. So the square footage based on if it's a new building, it's an addition. If it's a renovation, it's $1 per foot of renovation. How much renovation might we be doing, or how much a new building might we be doing? And then we look at doing a design contingency. I've been carrying 2%. Some I haven't been carrying any on if it's something that's fairly clear. There is an on-site contingency if I think that there are potential unforeseens for site conditions that we may not know about. If it's a virgin site or if it's a site that might have other things, if I know the site, I can apply that there. In most cases, I'm not carrying that. And then there's an owner's betterment contingency. I typically put 2% there, and a contractor's contingency or fee if it's a CSP, I'm putting 2% there just as a baseline. So that gets you to your total construction costs. Okay.
So the betterment fee, what is that again?
So the owner's betterment fee is basically your stuff that you may want to add or change scope along the way if there are other things that are direct. It's like, oh, we need to add, we might want to include this, we hadn't thought about it, we're going to add it in. So it's basically your fluff, for lack of a better term.
There's
So
extra contingencies, trust me.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm with you.
So from there, I do 10% for all of the professional fees that you're going to have, right? So that includes my fee, includes all of the consultants, the kitchen designers, everybody on there. It includes the geotechnical engineer, so the person who comes out and does the test borings, looks at the site, tells us how deep the piers need to be, tells us if they're retaining walls, what are the criteria by which we have to design the retaining walls. That includes materials testing, so when they come out and they're testing, they're taking concrete cylinders and they're going back and breaking them and verifying they break to the right specified strength. It includes test and balance, so for making sure that they'll hook a contraption up to every one of your vents and make sure it's delivering the right CFM that meets design after the building's open. It includes all of those permitting. It includes any other type of impact. You guys, they're not charging you impact fees, right? So not impact fees, but permitting. So all of those. 10% is a nice round number. I'm hoping you don't spend that, and if you don't, then that money can be used for additional FF&E, or it can roll forward to other projects in the bond. It is what it is. I'm not making 10%. I can guarantee you that. But there's a whole bunch of things that roll into that 10% cost. 10% is just kind of historically what we've seen. Some projects have more stuff than others. High school obviously has a lot more of that than an elementary school or a small addition, but 10% is a decent rule of thumb. There's some of my peers will carry 11%. I felt like 10% was safe in our case.
And so I'm sorry, you brought up that you were making 10%. What is the percentage you have in there for you right now?
Well,
For- not for you,
nobody
it's
has
just
proposed a
an
fee for future work. Currently I have a lump sum negotiated for the work that we're designing right now as not a percentage of construction.
Okay. So any future designs that you do, you're using a lump sum, not a percentage of construction?
I'll do it however you like.
Okay.
But that lump sum mysteriously always comes up to a certain percentage.
Listen, hold on. We
Let's
can
stay
do
on
that too.
Let's stay on track here.
Yeah.
Get into architect league. Let's see what you said
from
correct.
there-
Just for clarity's sake.
we look at an FF&E cost, right? And again, that's based on kind of what you might spend for furniture and equipment. If it's just a gym, it's not going to have as much stuff as a classroom wing might, but it's somewhere between 0 and 5% based on what that might be. And then I'm generally putting $5 a foot just for miscellaneous technology items like screens and other things that you might have throughout the building. Now, I'm not talking about in every classroom. I'm talking about like signage screens at the administration and other things like that.
But if you're doing like a gym or something, that wouldn't be a line.
No, and there's some that I took that down to 0 because it wasn't appropriate, you know.
It's helpful for me to walk through one of your total bids.
Sure.
So you can see all the different procedures. Has the committee been able to see that granularity,
So-
just on an example?
Yeah, I mean, it's technically here, but you couldn't. I don't know if you could read it. I mean, it's like right here.
We went
We've gone
through this with them.
We went through this with them, absolutely, yeah. So, this is a hypothetical
Yeah.
example, but yeah, I think that they understood kind of each step, or I hope that they did.
Because what hits me is that any increase in the dollars per square foot it's affected substantially more than the dollars per square foot increase, because every percentage is tied to that.
Right.
And then every percentage is tied to that total percentage.
Yeah.
And then you
definitely.
add on
And then you escalate.
escalation.
Yeah, I mean, it, you know, and that's, you know, that's the way that we, and I think everybody that I know of, you know, is gonna do this in some form or fashion, right, as far as when you're trying to figure
Yep.
out what something might cost in the future. And so, you know, the idea is that we try and put enough in there to cover you,
Yeah.
but not so much that you're, you know, you wind up with too much, right? So,
Well, I mean, I think today's good dollar cost is a good apples to apples on all these projects.
Yeah.
And we can argue. you know,
absolutely.
the
And I can
projection.
tell you what I've assumed for each of the projects as far as today's dollar or cost.
And
you know?
that's all built up here, right?
Right, and it's all in each one, and it's different, you know, high school's more expensive than an elementary school, generally speaking, because you have more things that go into a high school, and so we use a higher number there. And again, we're basing it off of what we're seeing. Now, you know, I still have people that tell me I'm too low, and I have people that tell me I'm too high, and you can argue both of those, but what I'm trying to do is hit a good spot that I think is gonna be realistic, that's not, I don't wanna sandbag it to the point where you guys have too much money in it and silly, you know, but I want to get you enough money to do what you need to do when you need to do it. So that's the goal. Any other questions on that slide? All right, so this is probably no surprise to you guys. You know, this is an example of Cherry Elementary for Royce City. We bid a prototype in 2021, 22, and 23, and it went from $308 a foot to $414. And if we bid it today, I would expect it to be at $425. And that was the number that I used for a new elementary for you guys as an example. We have bid an elementary school just the other day at $438. So that's saying, you know, that we're not going to build the Taj Mahal of elementary schools, right? We're going to build something that's a little pulled back from the top end of the market. And so that's that slide. This is an example of some of your facilities, what you guys have bid, and so I got these numbers from y'all, but it shows a similar story, and it lands with a bid in June of 419, so we're in the hunt, right? We're right kind of where we're the number we're carrying for elementary schools. So as we look at these, and I think we may have talked about this at one point, but we set priority levels. In your case, a lot of that is going to be based on timeline. Priority one would have been if I had seen an egregious safety issue, right? Something that needed to be addressed immediately. All honesty, you guys have done a great job of keeping up with your safety. There was nothing that I walked out and said, oh my gosh, this is a problem. I mean, it's rare, quite frankly, it's rare that I walk all the campuses and don't find something like that. You had a few restrooms that could be upgraded, but you had at least accessible restrooms at every campus, right? Which is a good thing. So there was nothing that I said it's got to be pulled forward, it's got to be done ahead of everything else. There's nothing that can't wait to be done when it makes sense to do it from an economical standpoint. Right? So that means you're good. So priority two is going to be from now until we can do it to 5 years basically. So 3 to 5 years generally, which you take a design, the time to get it designed and built and bid. And then priority three would be 5 to 10 or 10 or just outside of 10. So those are the kind of what we look at. And then there's certainly things that we would say, okay, well this is more of a maintenance item, we would pull it into M&O. And so that's how we classify these things as we go.
And Marty, just to go back, no, not a question, but just a statement. So looking at our 3 prototype elementaries, so looking at West and South and Elementary School 4, looking at, we went to a prototype model for value, for savings, and just to look at where the market is, and that these schools are relatively the same. Obviously there's minor differences in the 3 schools, but to look at 24 million to 43 million, I mean, and then to think about what we're looking at the future with elementary school 5 and elementary school 6, like having cost savings using a prototype model as best as we can to try to find savings, but looking at escalation and it's big. So there's, because 24 to 43 million, and we're not even talking about elementary 5 or 6 or and those costs. So anyway, just kind of shocking right there. Didn't want to gloss over that slide right there. So
No, and that's scalable too. So if you were talking about the scale of a new high school, you're looking at over, in most cases between 260 to 320 million. And that is a massive number. I mean, so you guys have done it, you guys have a really good spot having not been in the position to have to build a brand new high school from scratch, right? Because that would be a heck of an investment.
We have 2 fully functioning ones now.
Yeah.
Okay. You know what I was saying, we missed that we wanted the cost savings by having a prototype. And we have realized those cost savings in the fees, but I'm still challenged to think if we realize those cost savings on the actual build.
Right, the footprint and the square
Yeah.
footage of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my opinion, if you can use the same contractor and they can develop prefabrication pieces of it, you can start to see that. I don't know if that was an option. I wasn't involved in those projects, so but it is. You mostly see the savings in the architectural and engineering fees that you're gonna pay, and then you know what you're getting too. So you can make small tweaks as you go and perfect it each time.
I think, Richie, those are the things we can control, right? We made decisions to control the areas that we could control, fees, things like that. We can't control cost of goods. We can't control labor rates. That's somebody that sits in another part of the country that controls.
Whether the design itself could have been made more efficiently, that's the only thing that we
Yeah,
continue to look at.
Yeah, I think we.
But we went
I think
from west to south, even, the library configuration.
Now the library didn't cost more. Remember, you told us that.
I think, just to kind of add on to that topic there, there's some conversation going on specifically in the North Texas area for some of the districts that you're hearing in the news are closing campuses now. They're on the other side of the growth, and they were building and building and building and building. Now they're on the other side, and so now they're facing declining enrollment with 1,000 seats open, and they've got a campus and a half that they're trying to figure out what to do with from an efficiency standpoint. And so I've been in conversations with some of those superintendents, and some of the the districts that are still growing are now looking at prototypes that, because of what they're seeing in their neighboring districts, how they can build, knowing that they're gonna have to sell that possibly to a different, type of market someday. And so looking at, how do you base that footprint that it might be sold to medical field someday or to IT? And so those are some of the conversations that have never been part of our reality in this world, because we haven't faced districts that are now declining enrollment and have to close campuses like that. And so these are neighboring districts where the growth is moving out and the ones they're leaving are aging out. And so it's provided
The Dallas Morning News this morning showed all of the districts, and there weren't any growing. They were all declining.
Yeah, it's
Were those
provided
Dallas
a
County
new
schools or what?
Collin County, there's Collin County.
And some in Dallas.
Yeah.
And
The growth is all.
The
outside.
North Collin County is where it's growing, and South Collin County is where they're facing some.
So
of
is
the-
what you're talking about, that those other superintendents are building a school, say an elementary, in a prototype fashion that can be used for something else? How are they gonna get the zoning for that? You
They're
can't
just-
put a retail facility in the middle of the neighborhood.
but you're talking about Frisco.
Well, that's
Yes, or-
something we will have to look at, if that's like something we adopt and kind of go that direction. We need to know what the zoning is,
Right.
where we're building. Because if it's like here, which is a residential zone, you can't just sell it off and
Right.
and have an office building and
Right.
do business.
I guess that was
Right.
So we have
So
to
the
be
one of
aware of that.
The
if
advantage
that's
for us
plan.
having, saying we want elementary schools in neighborhoods so kids can walk and families can walk,
Never
it
rezoned.
doesn't behoove us to do that, right?
Right,
So-
but other areas that might can.
Yeah,
yes.
And I think we have an area that we
Yeah.
can consider for that as well, right? But I guess it's.
I believe schools and churches can be in any zone. I don't know if there's a.
Usually they can, schools can,
But,
churches
Yeah.
too.
but the goal
Churches
is,
too.
the goal is to,
Yeah.
to not overbuild.
Right.
And not overutilize, taxpayer funds
Absolutely.
in having to, demolish something or sell something.
So isn't part of the reason though that those schools are being closed, specifically I'll use Flower Mound, Louisville areas where they have campuses, is because the people whose kids went through the school and have now graduated and moved on, the families aren't moving and allowing new to come in. So how do you plan for that? How do
They're
you plan
aging
to
out.
know if people are gonna move or not?
I don't think you can. I think that's why now that we're seeing districts that have gone through the growth, that we've never experienced this before as school districts. But we're starting to see that's what's happening. And even today at Region 11, at our superintendent update, they showed again the declining school enrollment in the state of Texas for the next 10 to 20 years. That just the state of Texas in general is continuing to decline students across the state. Now, that's not how some of us are feeling, but the state, across the state in general, the enrollment in public schools is declining.
Yeah, since the pandemic, right? Yeah.
Okay, so the next section, really what we talked about is how we wanted to present this to the committee. And so what we started with is we strictly started with the 10-year strategic growth plan and the cost to do what is in the plan. Because it needs to be very clear that the strategic growth plan was adopted in January, and that's the plan we're working with. And no matter what we are looking through at some of these numbers, the when is, it's not about if numbers are gonna happen, it's when. Like those demographer numbers are coming. So we wanted to share with the committee, the 10-year strategic growth plan says this, and this is what it would cost for us to fulfill that, based on what we know right now. So that first slide that you have is strictly just the second middle school, elementary 6 within the next 10 years. And then I know we opened up and talked a little bit about the 1750 and 2250, but we were going off of those numbers to start with. So that's essentially 450 seats at 377 and about 150 at Canyon Falls. We did not address common areas or some of those other things in this because we're trying to do just capacity. And then we kind of have that below the line sections you'll see in the next ones that we go through. We don't have escalation in here right now. We didn't present inflation to them right up front. We just did today's dollars so they could kind of grasp what that would look like. So those first 4 projects are really to fulfill the strategic plan as it's written, and then the page behind them would be some additional conversations, other considerations with those additional seats. And then we included in there the bid date and the open date, and those dates are based on those graphs we showed, just saying right now enrollment's saying this. So that was the first slide they saw.
So just on that secondary page, just for clarity's sake, what of these numbers, it primarily affects 377 if we built out that 450 extra seats. What are those that are mandated or necessary versus nice to have?
Right. So we talked about that. So when we walked that campus and we took the tour, we know that the current cafeteria is pretty landlocked because it's on the inside. So we talked about the space that's in there. Since then, we've talked a little bit about the space up, I don't know what it's called, up kind of by the front office and auditorium where that coffee bar area is,
coffee bar kind of
as
cafe.
being potential cafeteria space. And I think we had a question on that, and we've been able to answer that. But we do know that we need some space cafeteria-wise, and that second gym that's connected to the auditorium would really be the ideal place to expand. It's got the high ceilings, it's got the place we could perfect some of those serving lines. What that does is, if you add the 450 and you get up to you add to get to 1750, the current competition gym as it sits would need work done to it, because it was packed in there for the high school before they moved out at 1200 or so. We were there with the committee on a middle school basketball night. It was pretty tight in there, a lot of people in there. But the other thing is with an expansion of seats comes a storm shelter. So then your gym.
Is that included in the 34 million?
I'll have to let him answer that.
Yeah, so we would anticipate that as part of that addition, what we call the addition there. So we were anticipating doing the gym addition as a storm shelter.
I mean, obviously, when you see this, it's hard to react to it positively in that the build is 32 million, yet adding a gym or redesigning a gym is 34 million in today's dollars.
The seats is 32, yes, right.
And I guess I would challenge, is that necessary? Or do you kind of go with the Duke philosophy and have a tight gym?
Mm-hmm. Here you go.
You know?
And then we would just have to make sure we would have to have storm shelter. Now, tell them what the code says as far as storm shelter for additions.
So yeah, so for an addition, the code requires you to do it for the added capacity, right? And so if you added, in this case, 450 seats, you would only have to do a storm shelter for 450. Now, clearly that's a way to save money, but then you're having to pick and choose who gets in the storm shelter, which is always a dicey proposition, I would think.
GPA, right?
Yeah. From way, yeah. Whoever's fastest. But, so typically we wind up doing it for the, once it gets triggered, we wind up having to do it for the whole campus. Or we'll do it, something that's somewhere in between, but that we think at a pinch everyone could pack in there and fit okay, so that when people are properly motivated, they can get close.
I think something else and just,
Jamie's first thing was safety.
Yes.
Well, then wouldn't you add a storm shelter regardless of if you expand it or not? If your first priority is safety, and I know we talked about it, there's storm shelter at the other campuses. So just to keep safety across the district.
we have
safe.
3 campuses with them and 3 without right now.
I can tell you that everybody who has existing facilities that were built prior to 21 or so is in a similar boat, and they're all struggling with the same thing. I am not aware of anybody, although there probably is somebody who has just added on one even though they didn't have to. Most people have said, well, we're going to let the code dictate when we do it.
Okay.
That's just, for what it's worth, that's just what your peers are doing. So, but I certainly understand the thought, and if that's something you guys wanted to consider, I think we've even priced some potential options for that. If that was
So, and to use Richie's terms, right, if you do the additional 450 seats at 32 million, you have gym space and storm shelter for 34 million, so you're at $66 million, $67 million.
so the
and
way
that's-
it is right now, the piece of the storm shelter is in the dollar per foot that's there, right? So it's not all in one or the other. So it's spread across the multiple pieces. So in that you could say, like, well, if we're gonna do one and not the other, it's difficult to slice and dice it, otherwise.
Well, for my
so-
question, or my statement, I guess, I'm adding the 2 together.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean,
So
if
I'm
you're adding
saying,
the two
hey,
together,
I'm
you've
adding
got,
the seats, I'm redoing the gym, inclusive of the storm shelter, and $67 million. And to Richie's point or statement of nice to have, need to have, right? If we're gonna expand that school to stay with our strategic plan and be efficient with the dollars that we have, it's $67 million of, I would put those most likely in need to have. It's that versus, you said 260 to 320 million to build a new facility.
yes.
So it's a lot of money. We need to question it. We need to look through it. But the reality of it is it's $67 million versus, I'll use the low end, $260 million.
Yeah.
So
That's the way, I think that's the way you have to look at it.
And the cafe expansion, that would be an additional 12, correct? The
Yes.
cafe expansion and gym 2 demo, okay.
And again, that 260 to 320 doesn't account for the land for another high school.
right, no, that's just the construction.
Or
That's just-
an indoor, or a stadium.
Or the
Yeah,
demo.
stadiums or anything.
Maybe
So,
520 you
I
could make
mean,
small.
it's crazy.
Yeah, so real quick, you mentioned about the gym 2. We're talking about the gym attached to the cafeteria
Yes.
currently? So that gets demoed and expanded to
As cafe.
all cafe.
And serving lines, redo the serving
Okay.
lines, because the flow of the serving lines has been an issue.
And so then it's a 2 gym high school.
Correct, which
So,
is pretty common for.
Would we have to expand the auxiliary gym?
Mhm.
It would stay as it is, like a practice gym, and then we'd have a competition.
So what we were showing, I don't have so there's so the area where the current gym is, and that's adjacent to the cafeteria.
Yep.
We would be renovating the area that's currently the cafeteria, the kitchen, and that area to the east. Okay, and I think there's a little small gym over on that side, right?
Auxiliary gym, yeah.
That auxiliary gym would be renovated as part of that. I included that in the square footage, and then we would tear down the other 2 gyms and rebuild the 2 gyms with a competition gym and a PE gym, and we would turn what was the current competition gym into the new cafeteria because it's tall volume, it's about the right space.
So the competition gym and the aux gym would be demoed and rebuilt.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
I'm with you.
From a common sense perspective, I think that's all unnecessary, but keep going.
What part's unnecessary?
A whole demo of perfectly good gym space just because we want,
No,
Don't you have to,
need a
you have
cafeteria.
to, you have to do it for
The
cafeteria.
shelter.
You have to have.
The cafeteria has to expand
And
into
the
that
shelter,
space.
the storm shelter.
Cafeteria expands without the demo into the gym we have now. There's no demo to expand the kitchen cafeteria. It's the competition and aux would be demoed, replaced with gyms, but those would also double as the storm
Right,
shelter.
so to make it a storm shelter, you have to tear it down.
Yeah, it's,
I don't think
it's
you can
not really
certify an
possible to-
existing building, could
No.
you? It'd be
I-
almost impossible.
But you would spend more doing that than you would to demo and rebuild it, to convert it.
My whole point in all that was I think there are things that are on the list to be considered that I would agree with Richie wholeheartedly are nice to haves that need to be, you can put them out in the future, that, hey, future boards or committees can consider these. But the need to haves, when you look at those three things, and if you throw the 12 million on top of the 67, so now you're at 79, it's still versus 260 for construction, building to building costs. Again, no land, no IECs, none of that stuff.
It is, but then what the committee sees, and what we have to realize is that 79 million, because it's a bid date of 2029, turns into 160 million or 165, just because of the
Yeah, if it's still open in
irresponsible
2030.
acceleration
But the
rate
260
we've
to
got.
320
But-
turns into.
No, amen.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate
So-
that.
so
I'm
that
just saying,
part's
there's
relevant.
sticker shock
Yeah.
Right.
on realizing, is this the best use of our funds?
So let's talk about inflation for a minute, because in the previous boards and bonds that I've been a part of, we factored in 0.5% a month growth, and that was kind of the number that we used to, and that worked in the 17 bond. It bit us, you know where, in the 2022 bond, and we're struggling with that, and we're seeing it on elementary 4 now. You're using 1% a month right now, 2.
I'm using 0.75% a month.
0.75%.
Compounded
And so
monthly,
I would
so-
tell you that that's, in my opinion, based on what we just went through, that's risky.
Well,
Right now, granted, who knows? We're all trying to roll the dice and decide what this country's going to do.
and we got burned, right? And I do not disagree, and I'm gonna get on a soapbox here and I apologize. We got burned because we didn't realize the inflation was gonna happen and this perfect storm.
And it wasn't just us, but it was every school
Everybody got
district that did a
yeah,
bond.
everybody got burned. And so now I think we're being hyper reactive, so we don't get that again. And so I don't not support having an aggressive number, but what the downside of that is one that's challenged to see if that's even realistic, and I got a chart here, I don't know if it is. But the downside to that is we realize that number, it sets the bid price. I mean, we can say it shouldn't, but it does. So that number's documented, that this is what we have budgeted for it. Lo and behold, the budget, the proposals come up to that
So
number.
then
That's just fact.
So if that's true, let's forecast negative growth.
Well, and I'm not saying that even, but and then also the other consequence to having those projected numbers is the sticker shock, and also, you know, whether the bond gets passed or not. Anyway, I looked at actual inflation rates month over month, and that's the blue line, right? What we're projecting off of is this. Well, it has gone down. Now, whether it has gone down in construction in North Texas, I don't know, and it probably hasn't. But what we're forecasting is, this are the actuals, and we're forecasting it with a 0.75, this is what it's gonna be. And that's just not real world. That's my point.
Yeah, and I'm with you, and I've watched those numbers. I believe that inflation, I'm praying that we can't continue to even, I'm hoping that it recedes, right? I mean, I feel like it has to. However, from my understanding, the bond Louisville just passed, they started at 12% a year and carried it through the end of 25. And then they started pulling it back from there. So what I've done is I've carried it flat and I've pulled it back below that 12% and tried to hit that kind of what would be an average over the period of potentially the bond I think you might be looking for. Now, we could look at it either way. I think it amounts to similar numbers. You'll be, you know, you may be heavier loaded towards the back, you know, back loaded versus front loaded, but we can look at it either way if that's something that you guys all feel strongly that we need to do. But again, my goal is to get you where you need to be, and when you have enough money to do it, right? I'm trying not to overinflate it, but I also don't want to leave you in a lurch.
And Richie, which carries more risk?
Forecasting forward and not needing it, or the other?
Right.
We're doing the other right now.
Right. So, and we're doing the other partly because we're right in the middle of experiencing what happens when you don't have those inflationary numbers correct.
Yeah, and I see your point about, and I think that there may be ways to manage the perception as far as, you know, it's like we goldfish analogy, grow to fit your bowl, right? So And oftentimes, I've got lots of clients who don't want to tell me the budget because they feel like I'll design to the budget, right? And so, I get it, okay?
What's it, 2, 3?
Yeah. So, but we can communicate out where we think the building needs to be. Once the bond is passed, if you don't use it, you don't have to sell it, but we could set a budget based on reality that we know of at that time, right? And so if we get out there and we've only experienced 4% inflation, then we could rerun these numbers at 4%, or what reality is, and say, this is your budget. Now, you've got enough, even though you've got others set aside, but that doesn't have to be, no one will remember this conversation by then, the public, the bidders won't. We put out the budget that's based on what we think is reality at that point. And so what's the fair and equitable version of what we're asking for? Yeah. Just like you would if you pulled it forward, right? If you pulled it forward, you wouldn't pull it forward to the same budget. You would pull it forward and you would say, well, I don't need the inflation I had, allocated, therefore the budget should be smaller.
And so, Marty, do you recognize that is another way to beat down the cost, is to pull it forward?
Absolutely.
But that's not, I take it, that's not something that's typically done.
You could balance that against the operational costs of the facility.
Okay. And so one of the things I think about is, when the inflation, the escalators in here seem to be the biggest portion of a very large portion of the pie. Mm-hmm. You want to figure out how to beat that. Mm-hmm. And if one of the ways is to pull it forward, and you go, well, that's not the common practice in public education. You wouldn't do that in private practice or in private because you'd invest that money. You would never do that, but public school's not that way. We can't invest this money and get a better return on it.
Sure.
The only thing we can try to do is beat inflation with it. And so when we build stadiums, mm-hmm. We're building as big as we can, mm-hmm. or as big as we think. We project out, we build more than we need. Mm-hmm. So we do that in our athletic facilities, right?
Okay.
Agree?
Yeah, certainly that's a strategy.
It seems to be a commonly accepted thing. We're going to build these huge athletic facilities.
Everybody
even
wants
though
to
we
be
know we're not
athletic
going to fill them up until we peak, we advance those dollars when we build the stadiums. And if I look at this high school, we opened it in 2021, had 1,100 kids. Mm-hmm. It's got 2,100 capacity. I think if we sat here today, we'd say that's a great investment.
Absolutely.
Well, you could use the composition gym.
We have 13 empty classrooms. But I'm sitting there going, I bet you we're not sitting here as a district knowing what we see today, going, man, we really screwed up by overbuilding that thing.
No,
I think we saved this district a ton of money.
I would agree. Yeah.
So you're saying build as fast as we can.
If inflation is the driving factor.
The key there will be what we our bond capacity, any given year to what we know we need to build, and then what could we add to
bond capacity and, like Marty said, and I'm sure Liz would agree, operational cost of building something you don't need right now.
The
You just
competition
have to
gym.
make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's why
gotta
I just kind of challenge that general rule of thumb that we just don't build more than we need because there's an operational cost. Well, I got 13 empty classrooms. I'm glad we have.
Yeah, and I imagine that those calculations could be run, right? And that I would think, that we could look at the operational
Well,
costs.
you could do it based on what you're forecasting inflation to be in these years and say, based on that forecast, in today's dollars, it's this. It's a 30% savings. I mean, the competition gym is a perfect example because that was not supposed to be built until phase 3, right? But because of saved dollars, we built it in phase 2 and saved that.
Nobody ever comes to me and says, man, don't build that big old stadium because we just don't need all that capacity right now. Nobody, no architect, nobody's ever just said, we just don't need it.
in an attempt to kind of move a little bit forward. This kind of relates to what you proposed with the Canyon Falls edition, i.e., I know why we did it, Doctor. I know why we did it, but it seems going to be a waste that we're just connecting something and only adding space for 150 students, versus our original intent was phase 3, that is a full branch. And basically good for the students too, because now you have a triangle and you don't have to walk all the way back to the central location. Has it been challenged yet, or should it be looked at, what if we were to build that out completely as it was first intended to do? And whether that cost relative, and then what other additional costs would have to be implied basically, we're squeezing the balloon, so now
Sure.
that 4,000 is coming this way. So what other additional costs would be associated? So we can compare that to the, I guess, what we said, 79 plus 14.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and we, in fact, we did look at that.
And I think,
Yeah, thank you.
agree totally, because I think that's where we got stuck on the 2250, 1750, and we're trying to stick within those parameters versus understanding that those numbers weren't necessarily set from the beginning. So since we've kind of figured that out, then
Yeah.
these conversations are, yes, progressing.
So we were saying, so one scenario would be, if we just kind of maxed out that area, right? So I took took the distance between the two wings and said if I put 2 classroom bays, so classroom hallway down the center, classroom on either side, made it 2 stories, we could fit about 29 classrooms, which would get you about 600 if you wanted to go that direction, okay? Which is 40,000 square feet. So 2 stories, 29 classrooms, and that would leave you some room to do some collaborative areas and other things supportive of the classrooms.
And possibly an office, like an administrative area, if we
Yes.
wanted to put an administrator on that end of the,
And usually when we do that, we'll take a classroom bay and turn it into a little office suite, so that way if it ever becomes a classroom in the future, it can go right back to that. And then we were saying 4,000 square feet for additional dining, which is, your dining would need to expand. Although if you look at we did look at the cafe as well, I'm not convinced that.
that's at 377.
That's a 377, sorry. I've run these numbers 800 times, bear with me. 5,000 square feet addition to PE and athletics, so I'm assuming that the teams get bigger, right? So you may need more lockers for PE and athletics. Again, we could look at what that might be, sharpen the pencil. And, but that wouldn't include renovating the existing stuff that's all relatively new. It would just be kind of a pieced on. And I'm saying that bid today dollars would be $30,856,000.
And that
So
includes the extra common space.
that
That
includes
would be necessary.
The expansion of the
It
hallway.
includes the expansion of the hallway and the connector piece. It doesn't address the V where they come together at the courtyard.
Does it address common space for lunch or kitchen space or anything?
Yeah, so 4,000 square feet for that.
4,000 square.
So that all in, that's 30 million today's dollars.
All in 30 million, 30.8.
Almost 31.
Yeah, almost 31 today's dollars.
So just so I'm clear, the 40,000 square feet is 600 plus 600 capacity. This is doing the connector at the end
Yes.
for
Yes,
those
sir.
two.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even though we don't, I know what you set aside, we don't need that much, right? Now, I'm understanding that our capacity is 2,100 there, not 1,750, we don't need 600. So I know there was a discussion about can we back it down and still create relief on the hallways? Does that save money, but still get us where we need and needing another, 300 or 400 kids in terms of capacity?
But the way I'm looking at it, and once again, realizing where we came up with this magical 2250, 1750 number was based on what we thought capacity limitations were
Right,
here,
right.
okay? If we can get the 600 extra here for 30 million, that puts that at 2,700. And I'm assuming that parking and everything else and what you're doing would make that viable. That would mean with 377 at 1,300, we wouldn't have to add a gym, we wouldn't have to do different. We wouldn't have to add 450 seats. We'd probably start to do the remodel and all of that, which is part of this anyway. But that turns a potential, I'm gonna do the quick math here, 32 plus the 14 plus 34. I mean, basically what, 90 million bucks?
I'm gonna trust you.
Okay. Yes. 89 in today's dollars. Instead, it's 30 million in today's dollars.
Right.
And we get the same capacity.
Yes.
But you still.
But we don't get
while
the
you don't-
upgraded gym, but we don't necessarily need the upgraded gym if we max that capacity at 1,300.
So one of the
Still
things I
have to
looked
do the
at,
storm shelter and all that, right?
you would for the yes, at the campus
Gym
you did
still,
the
one of
added
the gyms
capacity.
still has to.
Not
come.
if you're not adding seats.
But if you're not adding capacity yet.
I get it from a seat perspective,
Okay.
from a community perspective.
Okay.
I don't want my kid going to a school that doesn't have
Okay,
a storm
I-
shelter.
Right, I was just going from a
I get it.
perspective, yeah.
Then we could do it,
Physical time.
then we could do it, and then you would need to do the gym addition to do that. But if we're looking here, we've got the 2 classroom wings, and so that 40,000 would just be to maximize the area in between the two versus doing a hallway with a scab on it, you know.
Yeah.
Right, so you kind of want, if you're gonna do it, you want to maximize that area, and that was the reason why I was looking at that.
Well, I'm looking at
as
this,
an option.
right now it's 14, you're saying with 30, you can do the math. That's 16 million bucks, very, very well spent. You know, because you're saying to get to 150, it's gonna cost us 14 million, but if you truly blow it out, it's 30 million? I mean, why would you not do that?
Right, and you're gonna pay a premium for the smaller piece just because it's with economy of scale, you know, if you do a bigger project, you'll get a little better value.
So, you know, it seems like the committee now is gonna make all these decisions, when it probably should be us. But are they gonna get exposed to this data? Are they gonna get,
I think the other thing you look at is you put 2,700 kids in that school. What's your graduating class size?
It's over the size that the community said they were.
Right. You're at 675 on your graduating class, which is over what the community overwhelmingly asked not to have.
So I think there's a lot of those things to take into consideration, right? When we said about maximizing the use of existing facilities, being fiscally responsible, taking into account what the community's asked for, you know, in graduating class sizes. I mean, these are all things we have to figure out, right? That's why we're talking about this and trying to figure out the best way to keep all those in mind and make the right choice for the future.
Yeah.
Right. And I've said it, and it's true. I believe, at least it's true for my family and what you do. Like, there's a lot of financial decisions we have to make, right? And we as board members are called to be fiscally responsible and good stewards of the district's finances. But there's a lot of times that we make investments in our kids that are not the cheapest option. And that's what, first and foremost, our why are the kids. This committee is not being asked to make the cheapest fiscally, you know, I don't know, the cheapest decision. They're being asked to look at what this district needs from a bottom perspective of our why, and our why is the kids.
And I agree with that, Sam. I mean, if we wanted to do the cheapest thing, let's just put portables out there, but it may not be the safest thing.
So there's gotta be a balance for cheap.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm hopeful the committee is going through that process, and, you know, what I've experienced so far, they're going through that process, and they're gonna have a tough way to, you know, present to us.
And the committee understands back when Dr. Johnson did the visioning workshop with the board in September, we talked about the charge of that committee, and it wasn't about a decision to the board, it was about a recommendation to the board. So they know when we talk about their charge every time they're together, they're recommending something to the board. They're not the decision-making team, and that's been very clear. Because that was very clear coming from the board back in September.
Yeah, I mean, we get lots of feedback, you know, every day. And somebody in the community mentioned to me, and I can't remember who it was, I thought it was a pretty decent point. They go, hey, when I'm out, you know, looking at it for a daycare, you know, I'm not looking for the cheapest facility to put my kid in. You know, I'm not bargain shopping.
Right.
You know, and in some respects, it goes to the why. You know, you want to be aware there are cheaper ways to do things. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to your kids, you're not necessarily bargain shopping.
well, what I'd say, if nothing else, you build to the full capacity, period.
Yeah.
You don't have to fill it, but you definitely want to have it, versus spending half the money, or 15 million bucks to get it to 150. I think you spend the $30 million and build it to capacity. It gives you flexibility.
Yeah.
That would be a no-brainer to me, especially when you're talking about $15 million difference versus we're going to cost $35 million to build a bigger gym, which
Yes. The gym is
which I think can still be pushed back on. But
How's the auditorium at 377 for that?
It's really pretty. I mean, it's good size in my opinion. Part of the renovations that we were looking at there would be to do new rigging and things like that, you know, that you would expect after, I think it would have been, if that was the 99 portion, I believe. So we're at 24 years.
it's 20 years. Yeah.
20 years.
0304.
0304, sorry. But no, I would just need like whatever, you know, like normal updating as far as technology to be equivalent to a new place. But the bones are beautiful. I mean, seats still in great shape.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, there last night. I mean, it was standing room only.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you look at making that a high school, it's larger than the high school that used to be there when that was built, and I was just concerned about the capacity on that to hold.
I mean, typically you're not
13.
putting your entire student body in
True.
it anymore. I mean, that's, you know, those are most
You
people
do
aren't
that
doing
in
that.
the arena or a gym.
And as evidenced by growth, we used to do the entire band's performance all in one night. And
Yes.
it used to be like at an elementary school, and then it moved to the auditorium, and now it's multiple nights.
Yes.
Well,
Sixth grade filled it out.
Dr. Carpenter, would you be willing to basically let the committee know for the Canyon Falls editions, this is 14 million, but for a full blowout, as is always intended to be, would be 30 million? I'm just, at least let them see that.
Yes, we will for sure get that information to them.
Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. We didn't want to send any more information until this conversation happened, so.
And didn't some of those questions come up, similar?
They did,
questions?
they came up.
Yeah, so-
They came up naturally in the parking lot.
So
We
they-
just haven't sent them, we didn't give them like necessarily all of that information yet, because we wanted to have the conversation as a group, but they were asking those very questions last week.
Which is
Mhm.
what's good about
Yes.
the way the committee
Mhm.
processes. So.
Okay. Okay, and then if you keep flipping pages, you'll see a table talk Q&A, which is what we just did. We did the same thing the committee did. Great job, team. Right, Dr. Johnson? So then the next page, the next few pages are gonna get into capital improvements. So the process here was Marty met with our district operations team, and they spent probably 6 weeks. Took a little while to do that.
It did.
And so I'll kind of let them talk about the bulleted items. Those bulleted items are the things that between the district operations teams and Marty determined to put in here as far as capital improvements. So the Hilltop capital improvements page is here. The committee, we also brought up questions about just a full 20-year renovation of Hilltop, of which he can speak to, because that was something that could also be a recommendation. And then he'll be able to talk through on the 6th grade, and there's been some questions as we just opened it, so why, and they can talk through those pieces. And then the 377, just capital improvements, is on that third page. He can talk also about a 20-year reno at 377. So
Yep.
I'll kind of let them talk through that part.
All right. So we met with we met with staff, we met with maintenance and other, and Jeff and his group. So the capital improvements, let's look at it this way. These are things that, like when you're walking, these are things that I noticed that I would suggest needed to be corrected. Now, some of these things are more dire than others. Dire is probably not the right word. Some of these things are probably more pressing than others, okay? If we did a 20-year refresh, all of these things would be picked up in that 20-year refresh. So you wouldn't do this on top of the 20-year refresh. It's one or the other. And most districts will generally get on a 20-year refresh cycle. So if you look at districts like Plano, Frisco's looking at doing this with their next bond cycle. So Richardson has done it for years, where they go on, and 20 years is a good when things really start to wear out. And so if you look at your average rooftop unit, you look at many of your roofing warranties, you look at a lot of your materials, things will wear out as soon as 10 years or as late as 25 or 30, but 20 is when the bulk of it, kind of the critical mass, and you start to see things wearing out. And so it's a good target to look at refreshing a campus. And so as you become a district with older buildings, you want to start getting on a regular cycle to do that, versus just addressing things as they, I'm going to replace every rooftop unit when it goes down. And you're just playing whack-a-mole, trying to hit the problems. And so we always encourage our districts to be thinking about those things. And so that's why we suggest the 20-year refresh. Now, capital improvements would be, okay, if I'm walking through and what do I see as a member of the public if I know what I'm looking at, or what do I see as a professional, and I'm walking your building and I'm looking around and I'm seeing things that I would suggest need to be corrected. But ideally you would push to if a building's over 20 years old, I would recommend doing the 20-year refresh if you can. That's the right way to do it. You address all of those things and it gets you on a good cycle. You get past that and you start dealing with things that are where you're having to Band-Aid things more. And so where you're having to replace like, oh, you know, we had a flood and now we got to replace all the carpet. Well, suddenly you've got carpet that are out of sequence with everything else. And you wind up having bits and pieces, and you wind up replacing things that are before life cycle cost just to bring it up to speed with everything else, if that makes sense. So capital improvements, in this case for Hilltop, we were looking at conversion of play areas. There's some, you know, typical kind of sidewalk cracking and heaving that you see. That's really common in North Texas. Similar with a pavement, site sealant. There's a retaining wall that has got, there's some pinch points in the retaining wall that were probably up to code when they were built, but today they provide you can't get a wheelchair through them, and so we might look at readjusting the railing in those areas to provide wheelchair access, or making sure that we have an alternate route for those kiddos. There is some patching of the concrete where we got spalling at the retaining wall. So some of the things we look at are items that could be corrected today that would, if not addressed, will be more expensive to do later. And so things like when you have spalling concrete and the rebar is exposed, the rebar will start to rust, and it becomes it gets worse and worse. The rust then expands and it causes the concrete to continue to spall, and it's a cycle. Where if you can get in and patch it and waterproof it, then you're done and you should be good for a while. So we look at trying to address those type of things. Things like your just typical kind of cracking in sheetrock and CMU, the type stuff we would typically address. If there was something that looked like it was a structural issue, then that requires a little more looking. But most of this is on that front is aesthetics. From an exterior standpoint, we've got again the concrete ramps. We've got the perimeter grade beams. You've seen some chipping at the corners in some areas where the concrete's just kind of popped off over time. You want to get those repaired so that it doesn't get worse. Inside the building, we've got ceiling tiles. So ceiling tiles last about 20 years, and then they start looking like the example that I've used, probably told you guys, or at least some of you, is it starts to look like a quilt. So if you look at a 2x2 and it's sagging in the center, so it looks like it's like a quilt, then it's time to replace that ceiling is beyond its lifespan. And so over time, humidity and other things start to work on those ceiling tiles, and so you want to look at doing that. When you do the ceiling though, it's a good time to look at light fixtures. It's a good time to look at making sure that your HVAC is fully insulated and up to code, any sprinklers and fire alarm things. I mean, so it's like you don't want to pull the ceiling down and put it back and then 2 years later come back and take it down and do something else. So we try and start to lump some of those things together, and that starts to say 20-year refresh, right? Because you can address all of those things simultaneously. Let's see, the Hilltop's one with the roof-mounted boilers. The boilers are brand new, they're in good shape, but I would suggest we put a generator on them so that if we have the perfect storm of power loss and freeze, we don't damage the boilers again, which I understand happened to the previous set that was up there. And so like you had your house, and like my pool equipment, we lost power and it froze and it killed all my pool equipment. I had to replumb it and redo it all. You don't want that to happen to your boilers up there, it's expensive. So you put a backup generator on it. If it freezes and the power goes out, it'll keep it protects itself as long as it has power. So it keeps itself warm.
Dumb question, but isn't that insured?
That's a good question. I don't know how it was done the last time.
Money, it's not going to lower my insurance premium.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how your insurance works, and if that's or what your deductible is.
I mean, there's a disruption, obviously, to the facility.
Yeah, I do know that sometimes it can be time consuming to get through that process, and if you don't have hot water in the kitchen, that could be problematic. But that's something that I don't know if
these are heating only anyway, I think. But
so you mentioned it a couple times. I think Dr. Carpenter said this is a facility assessment number, and
yes,
starting to lend towards more of a 20-year refresh. Is there a 20-year refresh number in here?
Not in here. We didn't put that in front of the committee. We just did we have it.
One thing that I appreciate about this analysis
that one
is it's somewhat detailed and it's project focused.
Sure.
Which is reasonable. You do a 20-year refresh and it's a stinking $200 per square foot for every single square foot in that building, right, which just makes no sense. It all should be project focused. Are you going to put new floors? What would that cost? You're going to do this? What would that cost?
Yeah.
And
so
you've done that with here. I appreciate that.
Well, absolutely. And so generally speaking, you could do the itemized list. And if we were looking at bits and pieces of it, that's the right move, is to look at it itemized. But if you're looking at a wholesale go in and you're gonna redo all of the finishes, you're gonna replace all of the. Typically, you would look at replacing the like things like the carriers for the plumbing fixtures if they're wall mounted. These are things that are inside the wall. You don't see them, but eventually they rust out over time. And it's good for 30 years, maybe 25 years. But at some point, it's going to rust, and that toilet is going to fall off the wall, and probably while somebody's sitting on it. And so these are things that you would address as part of a wholesale kind of a piece. And so, but you got to get inside the wall to do all of that, right? So when is the right time to do it? That can be. It matters on what you got, what you're interested in taking on.
Well, maybe it's a time when we don't have to build 5 different schools,
Right.
Understand.
When we have more money.
So that question was asked, we have it, and that question was asked by the committee in the parking lot, but the bid today, 20-year refresh was 25.2. Bid March of 25 would be 28.8.
And that's why.
So I would agree with
I wanna
Richie that
highlight-
I would go through and say, show me all the things that are covered in the 20-year refresh. Yeah, give me this, take these others.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wanna
'cause it would
pick-
be-
I wouldn't just arbitrarily say, hey, charge me $25 million to redo it. Heck, that's half a school.
Well, and so normally, so there's 2 ways you can do that.
Yes.
You could take that and then decide what you wanted to do, right? So am I doing casework or am I not doing casework? That's a big one, right? So in most cases, the casework is going to be marginal at that time. If you look at what Plano typically does, they replace the casework at 20 years, generally speaking. But that's a good place to save money if you think you can get another 20 years out of your casework. But what you don't want to do is think you can get another 5 years out of your casework and then come back and do it at that time. Because at that time, you've got the carpets already cut underneath it, the walls are done, you know what I'm saying? So you want to start, once you start pulling
Yeah,
that
I
string.
think there are line item particular projects that
Yep.
would go together.
Yeah,
It would be
absolutely.
a package deal.
Absolutely.
So just an arbitrary, not arbitrary, I know there's more that went into it, but a blanket number of 25 million.
Yeah, it just doesn't.
I can build a new school for 25 more. Brand new, and get 25 years out of
Yeah,
it.
and you've done that in other cases, which that's where I'll push
Yeah,
back.
yeah,
But I
so-
appreciate what you did here.
And I'll say that when I look at the dollars per foot for doing that, it ranges pretty substantially depending on what you take on. And so I put a middle of the road option down there as far as
That's the easiest thing to do. But I guess what I would like us to focus on is what needs to be fixed, and then what's the cost to fix that?
Okay. Sorry, let's
Especially
move.
this time, because we had to build buildings.
Right, understand. And so, all right.
This is my first.
6th grade center. So we looked at the capital improvements there. We've got, and I know that you guys, and rightly so, you've recently put some great investment into that building, and it looks fantastic. So most of the things that we noted at the 6th grade center were related to the gym building that wasn't renovated or wasn't wholly renovated. I think they put in a wheelchair lift to the stage. They did some other things in that building, but it wasn't. There's still restrooms that aren't upgraded to accessible and other things. Again, I didn't say it was an emergency because you've got accessible restrooms elsewhere. But so the gym, about that 17,000 feet, has not been wholly redone. So this is hitting the spot checks of those things. And so, the things I noticed in there, on the site, we've got a storm line that's backing up. It happened to be raining when I was out there. When I was talking to Tommy, that one's a little tough because the site's relatively flat out there. So there's not a lot of place for that water to go. And they've kind of looked at it before and said, well, it's going to be expensive to do because we're going to have to cut probably all the way to the creek to do it. But that's something that I think you want to consider over time. Maybe you say, well, we don't want to bite it off now, we'll do it later. But that's one of the things that we looked at. As far as the exterior, you've got a series of different awnings. Some of them are metal, aluminum. There's steel, there's aluminum, and there's cedar. And so we were saying that the ones especially out towards the back, I put them in about a 60s vintage, but I'm told they were much newer. They're just, the style of them is very similar to what they would have been done in the 60s. They need to be at least repainted. They might need to be replaced. They're kind of slim pipe tube columns and whatnot. So we noted that. We've got steel windows with aluminum insulated glazing. So what you've got is the old hollow metal frames with just 1/4-inch pane glass, which are not leaking, amazingly. And usually when I see those on exterior conditions, by now they'd be leaking. They're not, which is excellent. But I would have recommended those. You budget to replace those sometime in the near future. You've got some grass that needs to be replaced around the perimeter, mostly where it's washing out of downspouts. And it's going to continue to get worse unless you reestablish the ground cover there. The awnings we talked about. Paving of the service areas, so the dumpsters are sitting on kind of dirt rock mix right now, and so I would recommend that you pave that and get a surface drive to that area. You could put a dumpster screen wall around it if you want. The city or the town might make you do that as part of that work. I'm not sure, but that was in here.
Yes, they will.
Yeah. The interior, there's some hardware that was not upgraded to ADA in the administration area, and I'm sure somebody looked at it and said, well, let's upgrade the kiddos first, and the administrators maybe will hit that later, but it's there, and then at the gym where I see that. Did you have a question there? No, okay.
No, Marty, I'll say, you can probably say it, Tom, I don't think you need to go through all this detail.
Okay.
I appreciate that you did this.
Yeah,
And I think we all
Absolutely.
appreciate, you put a price to it.
Sure, okay.
And we get all of these things.
One
Do you guys
big,
agree?
yes, one big picture point on this, how old is that structure?
So
Is it
it's
six- how old-
several
The
ages.
sixth grade center.
Yeah, it's several.
It's a mix,
I mean,
so
it's as
66
old as
is the oldest
66
portion?
Is the oldest, I believe.
Yeah. So 66, 70.
And the point I want to make about that is, we're looking at making investments in other buildings like 377 that are not near as old as that. Nobody that I hear at the sixth grade center saying, man, this building is a terrible place to educate my kid. They have facility envy or something around the campus. I mean, it's always been one of the highly rated, highest scores for sure. But everybody's loved it when it was intermediate school. They love it as a sixth grade center. And it's just interesting to me, it's the oldest structure. And so when you talk about making investments in these other structures that are old, I think it's a great example for us that these have a lot longer life expectancy and useful life.
Yes.
Because of how well they're maintained.
Absolutely.
And so in some respects, how charming they can be.
Yeah, very much so. And I'm biased, but I love old buildings. I mean, there's some really nice character that you get in some of those places.
And the loudest air conditioner in the district still remains.
I never hear about it.
They didn't take it out. Yeah, you didn't
The
sit in
next
that
one
room.
talks about the actual renovation of the gym, like the whole.
Yep.
I gave you a break on this. Explain this one to me. So you're basically, it's $7 million more to,
Yeah, so this
To
is
renovate the
basically
gym.
the 17,500 square feet of the gym building, plus the other CI stuff, but which was mostly in there, so most of that's been discounted. But this is that basically to renovate that whole area.
so we've already in the 2.9, and I don't mean it to be challenging here, just in the 2.9, we're upgrading the gym restrooms, we're doing different things in that gym.
Right.
But we're gonna say, we're gonna add 7.3 million more to
So
upgrade the gym.
yeah, so that's replacing all the metal panels on the inside of the gym, which are dented and rusting in places. It's new stage, so it's got that stage and these new stage equipment, flooring, curtains, all of those things. You would keep your wheelchair lift because that's brand new, but replacing the stairs on the other side of the stage. New wood floor, assuming that you would go back with the wood floor. You could probably save if you didn't, but there is a wood floor there existing. That would be the area around. So the area around that, there's a concession stand, there's restrooms, there's a locker area, which is expensive with plumbing. So we all new fixtures and everything in that area. And then the area that's off to the side there I'm not sure what they're using it for now. The other kind of
Out by the front?
yeah.
That's the DAE.
DAEP.
So what is the true student, I'm not sure, what's the true student issue that we are fixing by upgrading this gym?
The student issue.
Yeah, student, faculty, I mean, why do we need to upgrade?
Yeah, I think
it?
bleachers.
Bleachers
they're
would be
not
the
able
biggest.
to use.
Would be the biggest thing, but that would have.
Can we add
I had a
bleachers?
bleacher number in the 2 million.
And then I think student performances are limited there. So like sixth grade came over here, which I don't even know if they could have gotten the whole, because we got such a good beginner band and a lot of numbers, they performed over here. So they're not able really to perform necessarily.
I know Ms. Williams in our campus tour said her class
She'd
size,
like another gym.
because she has so
So
many
many
kids
kids,
in one
they need
PE
another
class,
gym.
and it's almost,
Because they do PE and pre-athletics, so they
Yeah.
kind of they're running two programs in that one.
And that's why I was
AISD.
excited originally to see this in there, because I was thinking it was the gym that we currently have as warehouse space, that's a dedicated gym.
Right.
I was thinking it was actually making that a PE space or a gym space. And I'm in a quandary why we spend $7 million on a gym for new bleachers versus not spending any money on a warehouse space that's, I know, gym that's being used as warehouse space.
Yeah.
Well, there's no plumbing there.
Well, okay, was that gonna cost $7 million to have
I could
plumbing?
make
I
it
don't
so
know, bathrooms are expensive.
there's no HVAC, there's no
Plumbing's got
plumbing.
concrete,
Don't do that to me.
correct?
The plumbing has concrete in it, yes.
Plumbing's concreted.
The drains have
I
been
think
filled with
Marty's-
concrete in that building,
I
but.
think Marty's recommendation for that red barn would be to demo it and
Yeah.
do nothing with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got probably a limited return on that as a school space. It makes a great warehouse right now.
What would it cost to demo it
Mhm.
and basically add another gym, but also storm shelter when you're doing that? Because it's got its own space.
We priced something similar to that, didn't we?
But
Are you going, do you want to go outside to get to your storm shelter?
You're doing that anyway.
you're doing it anyway.
At sixth
For
grade
one
campus.
part.
That's sixth grade campus.
Right, sixth grade campus.
Yeah. It's on the sixth grade campus.
But now you've got everybody. I mean, either way. unless
Is your goal to have 2 gyms there?
I think absolutely my goal is to have 2 gyms there.
Everyone's recommendation has been to say that a 6th grade campus doesn't have 2 gyms.
Usually a middle school just has, 6-8 has 2.
Yeah,
I
Chris,
think AYSA
so,
would like us to have 2 gyms.
I was just
because
thinking
I
of
think
the
they have a
space,
kid on every
600
goal.
kids there eventually.
I want to say
uses
that,
it
you know
as
the
two
square
gyms.
footage of that warehouse, is it 7,000 square feet? I'm going by memory. 7,000, 8,000 square feet, which is comparable to what we would, so it's about 7,000 or 8,000 square feet. A normal gym without other auxiliary stuff or arena seating or anything
Right,
is
right,
about
this
that,
just-
is about 8,000 square feet. But, so we priced a version of a storm shelter at 8,000 square feet for one of the projects, potentially. Because it would be, it was.
This is 8,000 square foot shelter.
Yeah, so that would be 6 million, was it, did that include demo?
No, this was just building a brand new one, just as a shelter.
Yeah, so you're looking at 6 million and
Plus
then
demo.
probably,
So 7 million gets you a
Thank
storm
you.
shelter and a gym.
Almost $1 million in demo on that building.
Versus
Well, I'll take it, $3 million.
yeah, I think that's about right. I think you're looking at probably 7 million to tear it down and rebuild it as a storm shelter. That's rough seat of the pants numbers here.
And you'd need another building
For maintenance.
And you need to rebuild the warehouse somewhere, yes, that's right.
That could be a metal building, right? And we actually own the land now behind there that we can put anything on there we want.
And it really
doesn't have to be a
basically
gym.
is a metal building currently. It's bricked on the outside, looks nice, but it's a metal building on the inside.
That's my only thoughts is, if we're gonna spend $7 million, I'd rather spend it and actually create a secondary gym space for these students, as well as a storm shelter. Just makes sense to me.
But the truth is that's a decision that can be made later. Fair, I mean, if the bond is passed and you have the 10 million, you go, hey, do we really, let's dig deeper here.
Absolutely.
Is it a $10 million investment in this one gym, or is it a better investment to add?
How far can we take that money? And I think we could take it further than, you know,
Well-
if we looked at really being judicious with what we were doing, you know, you could take it either way. So, you know, if you wanted to look at it like your initial proposition and say, you know, we don't need to do a wholesale renovation, we want to hit just things we need to hit, we could do that and save money that way. Or if you wanted to look at it and say, well, you know, what would it cost to demo and rebuild this warehouse piece? But there is the unknown at this point is the new warehouse, because I'm not sure where we'll put it in.
And the next one addresses capital improvements for 377, so walking that campus and identifying those capital improvement needs,
All right.
including replacement costs for some of the turf and things that are going to come up
Yep.
on.
And I guess I'm wanting to read all of these then based on.
I don't think you need to read and go through them.
What's that, you want to go through them?
No,
No,
it's
okay, okay. So, but yes, the highlights, I would say this does include turf and track resurfacing, turf replacement at all of the turf in the various locations. And so those are, you know, that's a chunk of this. But other than that, it's kind of typical things that we've been noting. There is, I am showing renovating the baseball, softball concession, and there's some cracking, some pretty significant cracking on the exterior of that building. We have also included the cover for the baseball, softball seating. Those are their highlights I want to point out here. Theater rigging lighting. So, any questions on that?
The next set of slides are identical. It was just a phase where we showed them the escalation. So you're not seeing anything new there except for the escalation inflation pieces.
Marty, just on that last slide on the 13.9 for the
Yes, sir.
rehab of the, that's not the right word, but those projects. That's independent of how much we build on there, right?
Correct.
This
This
will-
only, that
this
only
needs to
addresses
happen
the existing.
anyway.
Okay, yes, okay.
Yeah, just kind of open it up for questions, what discussion points they want to talk about on this. I know we kind of talked a little bit about escalation and the 0.75% earlier, so is there anything else?
I don't have anything. Again, the committee is going to be looking at this through the lens of strategic planning. Dr. Johnson did a great job so far in facilitating, and Mr. Hawks was really here for the last one.
Yes, I was.
He's on judging on the first three. But again, like, I think Marty's knowledge, Dr. Johnson, what they've been through, being able to look at all of what we need and let them come to their presentation of what they want to give to this board to evaluate.
Dr. Johnson, would you mind coming up for just a moment? I want you to kind of just give them a quick insight into meeting 5 and meeting 6. Sure. Because they all received the build a bond email that you sent to the committee. They also have seen it.
The worksheet.
Yes, the worksheet, thank you. And so I wanted them to kind of know what we're doing next week, and they have a copy of this, so they've been able to kind of see through that, because we'll have our financial advisors, but talk a little bit about next week, what that looks like, and then meeting 6, which is after Christmas.
Sure. So the next meeting is all really knowing their capacity, what their budget is, and the financial advisor presenting these slides. Liz and I are going to have a call with Matt Bowles from RBC next week, just to prep them. I've worked with Matt numerous times across the state, so he understands the logistics and how we run the meetings. So that's kind of the ANSI part of this. We've given them everything up until now, except, what the capacity is, and that's when it all starts coming together. Their goal was to take that worksheet home and build a bond that they felt really outlined the needs and what your citizens would be able to accept in the ballot box. That's in their head too. Of course, we haven't given them budget yet, and so now they come back and bring that to the table. After the financial advisor has his presentation, and Julie, I think she'll be presenting too with Matt, then we will go back to the tables. They'll bring out their worksheet, and as a table, they will build a bond. So they built it at home, alone, or maybe with a spouse or someone like that. And then now they're gonna build it at the table. And this is all dress rehearsal still. It's not finalized. I've learned working with these committees that if you only allow them one night to do that, it's not enough. And they have angst over that. They want to know they worked on this a few times. So the goal is for them to come back to meeting 5, and then they'll have this bond they build at the table. While they're building that, of course, some tables will finish earlier than others. I'll say, okay, table 1, I want you to combine with table 2, and I want y'all to explain to each other what you did in your package. And they will come to a 2/3 majority. That's how each project will make it into that table's bond. So after that night is finished, they take their worksheet. We don't keep it. They take their worksheet back home with them, and they get to review one more time. And then because we have such a extended time between next week's meeting and the final meeting in January, they will have a lot of time to think about that. And I've encouraged them to talk to people outside of that room, to get feedback from others. I've said that numerous times to them, because as you all know, they're a cross-section representation. They're not the only ones who will be going to vote on this when it comes to the election time. And so I need them getting feedback from others. So when they come back to the final meeting, we will have plenty of time to answer questions, get any unresolved concerns, attended to. And that night is when we use the electronic system. So they'll pull their worksheets out again and have more conversation at their table. And then each table's facilitator has a login to the electronic system, and they will take roll. It's only by numbers. It's not like, oh, Craig voted this way, you know, or Sam voted this way. It's not like that. So it's just based on numbers. So there's no record of who voted which way. You know, we don't want anyone to feel on the spot. And so that system works very well. It builds a bond at the table, and then it takes that level of bond package and it builds it through the room, through the 6 tables. And then we will finish up that night and celebrate.
So I appreciated seeing that worksheet that you created. It's a very good process. When will they get exposed to some of the things we talked about today? Because, I mean, all these different things, when will they get exposed to that information as part of that worksheet?
I think everything that we have discussed tonight, I've got a couple of notes of things they might not have. Pretty much everything is in that parking lot because they have asked those very same questions. So she sent that to them yesterday.
Does that become part of the worksheet then, that they're building this bond on?
Oh, okay, so you're talking, okay, I know what you're talking about. The piece so they've gotten questions to that, but then we've got to come back to them and talk about the connecting out here
Right.
and doing the full 29
Right. So
classrooms.
we told them that that worksheet may change between the last meeting and this meeting
Right.
next week. So they were aware that they may bring in a one version, but have an updated version to work on that night at their table. Yes, sir.
And so that would be in response to this meeting.
And they were aware of that. They knew that that was a possibility.
And we notified that committee, was it yesterday or Monday? Monday or yesterday?
I said, yes, Monday.
That we were having this workshop, so they were aware.
Or
that we
no,
were-
yeah, Rick said that yesterday. And they got their parking lot questions on Monday, so they have plenty of time to review all 61 questions before they come back next week. And I will say that this is a lot of moving parts here, and Marty has done an amazing job getting this to the place where it is digestible, because as you know, there's not a lot of experts in that room who build schools, right? And so we have to get it to a point where they understand it so that they can make the best decisions to make a good recommendation to you all.
What I've enjoyed about listening to the conversations around the room is we have experts in a lot of different fields that impact building schools. And so it's been nice to have them at the table because you're hearing those different conversations. And so having, 50-ish members in there from all the different fields, they're having very robust, if you ask any of our principals, they're facilitating those groups. And they're just listening and they're synthesizing and they're collecting and kind of running the tables. But they're not a voting member. The principals are not voting members. It's just the members of the committee at the tables.
The students,
None of us are
the
voting
students have been
members.
interested.
The students
too.
have been
They've had a
they've
great
done a great
perspective.
job. Yeah.
Marty, by the way,
Sure.
I know I've been very challenging, but thank you for all you've
Absolutely.
done. It's been
My
very
pleasure.
helpful. I'm just challenging concepts, not
Yeah,
challenging
yeah,
person.
yeah, we all want to get to the best place. Absolutely.
Does anyone else have anything? We can return to the dais and adjourn officially. All right, the time is 4:37 p.m. and we are adjourned. Thank you.